Chapter 27 of The Child of the Moat. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Follis. The Child of the Moat by Ian Bernard Stoughton Holborn. Chapter 27. The Birthday Party. After the battle, the Earl of Hawick disbanded the greater part of his forces, retaining but a small nucleus in case it should be necessary to bring military aid to the party of Argyll and Glencairn in support of their covenant against the regent. With this small force he moved northward. The Duke was far too sore hurt to travel, and neither he nor Aline were able to move for some time. As soon, however, as they could sit a horse, they set out for the Castle of Menstrie, where they arrived in due course and were most warmly welcomed by the Duchess of Ochil and her daughter Shiona, who had been anxiously awaiting Ian's return after they first received news of his arrival in Scotland. His mother was overjoyed to see him, and he briefly told her the story of the child. When he had finished, she kissed Aline and said, "You poor sweet thing! Now at last you have reached a haven of rest, and you must count me as your mother, as far as I can be one." Aline had not before felt shy of her boy's clothes, but the gentle, courteous lady made her long for her own things, and she blushingly began to apologize. "You need not distress yourself, dear child," said the Duchess. "We can soon remedy that. Indeed, you look very pretty, and you make so graceful a page that you need not regret your present garb," she added kindly, and stooped and kissed her again. "We shall just make you one of ourselves, and you have only to tell us what you want. For the present we can send over to Stirling and get everything that you absolutely need this very day." In the evening, as they were all sitting by the fire, the Lady of Ochil leaned over and, taking Ian's hand, said, "I have some sad news for you, my boy. You know that the estate was very sadly impoverished when your father succeeded. But he has been extravagant, and your eldest brother was the same, and always borrowing from him. Worst of all, your brothers induced your father to make over to them during his lifetime all the estates that he could. The regent, too, has already shown her hostility on your succession. It is a very long story, but you will have little but the title and the small original estates round the castle. Even those are so burdened that I doubt whether we can continue to live here." "Do not mind, mother, about me. I never expected anything, and so I shall not miss it. It is for you that I am sorry. You will feel the change so much." "No, my son, I am so glad to get you back that I mind nothing." Aline rose from where she was and sat down again on the floor at Ian's feet. "I am so sorry for you," she said, and once more she had that curious kind of feeling that she had noticed before. She was very sorry for Ian, but was she altogether sorry for the fact in itself? Did it not in some way bring them closer together? Ian's sister Shiona had always worshipped her second brother. He was unto her as a god, and as she watched Aline it rather amused her to see, as it were, herself over again in the way that the child continually hovered round him. She was the youngest of the family, and now a tall, slim girl of 17. She felt curiously shy of Ian, as she had not seen him for several years. He still looked very young, but he was now the head of the house, in her father's place. She soon fell under Aline's spell, and the two girls became fast friends. Except in appearance and physique, Aline was much in advance of her age, and her recent experiences had matured her view of life. The girls occupied the same room, and were continually together when they could not be with Ian. Ian sometimes felt even a little touch of envy. He had come to regard Aline almost as though she specially belonged to him. It was a time of considerable trouble and anxiety, both in public and private affairs, yet it was a very happy household in spite of all their troubles and difficulties. Ian was very slow in recovering his strength. Excitement had carried him through, but the collapse was all the more severe when it came. For 2 months he could move but little. However, he gradually began to be able to take short strolls out of doors. Even before this he had set his mind to see what could be done to save the remnant of the estates. Rigid economy had to be practised, for he was determined that property that had been in the family for hundreds of years should not go, if possible. Unfortunately, only a small portion, even of the fragment, happened to be protected by entail. Consequently, he found it necessary to reduce the fragment still further by selling 2 estates that had been acquired by his grandfather. They were so heavily burdened that the margin was very small, but it enabled him to prevent the foreclosure of his most pressing creditors. All the retainers and servants were dismissed, except 1 serving man and a maid. The horses were sold, and the castle was all shut up, except the hall, the library, and a few bedrooms. The arras, the plate, and everything of value except the heirlooms were sold. The only thing Ian retained was a famous sword, given to him by the Regent Arran for his services against the Lords Wharton and Grey. It was of immense value, magnificently jewelled. He took it out and looked at it. No, he could not part with that. It was too full of association and interest. The household arrangements were simplified to the barest necessities. The girls did the housework, and Ian himself, when necessary, assisted the serving man. He wore the simplest homespun, and his sister dressed as plainly as possible. Ian refused to allow his mother to wear the things that the rest of them did, because, he said, they all had the future before them in a way that she had not. She smiled and kissed him, and assured him that she would be quite happy whatever she wore, as she had her dear son back again, and she chaffingly impressed upon him that it was still long before she would be an old lady. Aline absolutely insisted on wearing things that even Mistress Mowbray would not have provided, both gowns and body linen. But they were beautifully made by Shiona and herself, and although the material was coarse, the general effect was always charming. She succeeded in getting some frieze in excellent shades of green and brown that made most pleasing colour combinations with the brownish white of the full sleeves and skirt of her coarse dowlas chemise and the rich red of her glorious hair. The result of the new Duke's efforts was that he gained the respect of everyone, and 2 of his largest creditors came to him one day and not only said that they would not press for payment, but offered to lend him more at a much lower rate of interest. This offer he accepted, and paid off a number of smaller creditors who lived at a distance and did not know what was going on. After a few months he brought things into such a condition that, though he saw no prospect of being anything but poor all his life, he hoped to leave the property in a fairly sound condition when he died. There was one little extravagance that he had determined to allow himself. Aline's 13th birthday took place in April, and he resolved that she should have the happiest day of her life, if human means could accomplish it. He pondered for a long time how it was to be done, because he regarded the property rather as a trust than in any way his own. At last he bethought him of the sword. That at least was his own. It was true, his most cherished possession, but he would part with it. He took it out one evening and fingered it fondly. Truly it was beautiful, and the only relic of his early youth. Other things might be replaced, but that could not. Moreover, it would be a joy forever, whereas a day's pleasure was soon gone by. 'Sdeath, how could he think such things? He hated himself. So he resolutely shut the case and turned the key. What was a sword compared with Aline's happiness? He had to take his sister into his confidence, as he wanted Aline to have a complete outfit for the occasion, and this Shiona was to arrange unknown to her. Ian took the sword to a goldsmith in Stirling, but the man did not like to take it. The sword was so well known and considered as one of the local marvels. At last he persuaded Ian to let him lend him the value of the sword, allowing a year in which it could be redeemed. Ian gave the man a few commissions to execute for the great occasion, and departed. Everything was planned with all secrecy, and Aline was not told about it till 2 days before, when a number of persons arrived to put the old place into order. The old rooms were thrown open and cleaned. The arras that had been sold was temporarily replaced by other fine specimens. Sconces with hundreds of candles were brought, and the floor and the furniture and the metalwork was polished till all shone like a mirror. The old heirlooms, including the magnificent nef, a gold or silver centrepiece for the table made in the shape of a ship, and other gold and silver plate, which Ian could not sell, but which had been put away, were brought out. The beautiful old castle had never looked finer. Serving men and maids, pleasantly attired, were everywhere at hand. There was a new costume for everyone. Ian's was of very simple material, but he looked wonderfully handsome when he met Aline on the morning of the great day. "I have a very nice present for your birthday, Princess," he said, stroking her hair, "but it will be rather a shock at the same time, so you must prepare yourself for it. I have been thinking that you need a lady's maid," he went on laughing, "and I have succeeded in finding you one." "Marry, I need no lady's maid," she replied, somewhat puzzled at the twinkle in his eye, "and you must not think of such a thing. I prefer to look after myself. I'm not a grand lady, and even if I were, I would rather not have one. I am sure I should not like her." "I am sure you would," said Ian, "and in any wise you must try and like her, because I insist." "You must not tease me, your Grace. I really do not want one." "I will not be called your Grace, pussy," he said, gently pulling her hair. "Well, if you get me a lady's maid, I shall call you your Grace, and then we shall all be grand together." "But I have gotten her already. I heard of her in a curious way, in a letter from Walter Margrove, but I kept it as a surprise until I could get hold of her." "Oh, but really, Ian, I do not want her," Aline protested. "I should hate her. Yes, by my troth I should." And she looked genuinely distressed. "You would not hate this one," he replied a little sadly. "It is someone that you know, but I must not tease you." "Do you mean Audrey?" she asked doubtfully. "That would not be a shock, sweet child. No. Here she is." He then beckoned to someone out of sight through the open door, and a slim girl of nearly 12 came shyly forward and stood hesitatingly on the threshold. Aline gave a little startled glance, and then looked at Ian, who smiled reassuringly. "Oh, Joan," she cried, They told me you were dead." "I was very ill," said the child, louting low. "But I was not dead, Mistress Aline. It was the little girl that came from Barnard Castle who died, whom Mistress Ellen Allen had sent to Durham from Teesdale too, much in the same manner that you sent me." "But how did the mistake happen, Joan? And why did you not let me know?" "The woman that was looking after me died, and I was taken to Newcastle. I was ill, oh, so ill for a long time, and I knew nothing about it, and when I heard, I could not for long enough get any one to write for me, and then at last I was told that you had disappeared. When Walter Margrove heard about it, he looked me up in Newcastle, and then some time after he told me that I was to go into service with the Right Honourable Sir Ian Menstrie, Knight of the most noble order of St. Michael, Lord Duke of Ochil, and Earl of Strathallan, and I was so frightened." Ian could not control himself, and the child had to pause while he laughed. "Whoever put all that into your head? Never mind, you can forget it. Just go on." "It was Walter Margrove, your Grace, and he told me not to be afeared, and I should find someone that I knew. But it was not till I came here last night that I knew who it was, and, oh, Mistress Aline, I heard what you were saying just now, and you will not hate me really, will you?" "No, Joan, no, I will never hate you, and indeed I am so glad to see you looking so much better." And Aline flung her arms round the child's neck and kissed her, while tears of joy stood in her eyes. For a time the children forgot everything but themselves, and Ian stood and watched them in their perfect happiness. Aline was very much taller than Joan, and in contrast with the frail, delicate child, looked like a goddess of strength. Joan clung to her in ecstatic abandon and gazed into those wonderful ultramarine blue eyes as though they were the windows of heaven. "I never knew before what it was," she said, "to be perfectly happy. Mistress Aline, I think the old folk at Holwick were right. You cannot be a child of ordinary flesh and blood like the rest of us." "Hush, Joan, you must not talk like that, and I told you long ago that you must not call me Mistress Aline. But, oh, I am so glad to get you back. You cannot tell how glad." Ian was just going to steal away and leave them to their joy. It was so pure, so unalloyed, when Aline suddenly bethought herself of him, and leaving little Joan, she rushed forward, seized his hand with both her own, and pressed it to her lips. "It was you who thought out all this. Oh, you are good to me." She lifted up her face, and he printed a kiss on her forehead. "No, Princess, you remember my quotation from Homer. It is you that are good to me. I owe you everything. I do not mean mere physical life. That is nothing, nothing." The guests were to arrive at what a later age would have deemed the very early hour of 11 o'clock, so after breakfast Ian suggested that Aline should go upstairs and get ready. "But I am ready," she said. "You cannot appear like that," said Ian. "You must get Shiona to tidy you up," he said with assumed severity. "But I have nothing better than this," she answered, just a little wistfully. "Oh, yes, Shiona has some kind of a thing that will look better for today. Run along with her and take Joan. It can be an apprentice lesson for her." When Aline reached her room, she was lost in amazement at the things that had been prepared for her, and was charmed with them all. Shiona helped her to dress, and Joan folded up the things she took off and put them away. The linen was of the very finest quality that French looms could produce, smoother to the touch than anything she had ever worn, and adorned with bands of tela tirata. There was a pair of the fine silk hose that had recently been introduced into Britain, of a beautiful blue, somewhat lighter than those she had lost, and with white clocks. The broad-toed shoes were of white kid, with blue satin showing through the slashes, and a large real sapphire set in silver on each shoe. The camise was of soft white silk, rather full, smocked at the throat, and reaching below the knees, with 2 bands of lace insertion of the finest Italian punto a reticella near the hem. Above this Shiona put on the armless surcoat, which was low at the neck and short, showing the white camise both above and below, as well as the arms, which were full at the shoulder but tighter toward the wrist. This was decorated round the open sides with orphreys, or borders of cloth of silver, embroidered with white heather, the badge of the menstries, in which the little white blooms were real pearls. The cloak was of rich blue velvet, with 2 exquisitely designed diamond clasps, and tasselled cords of white silk, the whole lined with white satin and adorned with a short cape and border of miniver. In the 2 lower corners, and again near the clasps, it was delicately embroidered with coloured silk and gold and silver thread, after the fashion of old Scandinavian work. A belt of large rectangular silver plates, each with its own sculptured design, and a chatelaine of gold completed the costume. It was a little old-fashioned in style, but Ian preferred the lines of the earlier date to those that were coming into vogue. Aline was so overwhelmed with delight that she did not at first pause to reflect, but after a time she suddenly exclaimed, horror-struck, "Shiona, what are you doing? You know that I have not the right to wear any of these things, except perhaps the chemise. My father was a gentleman, so I may wear white silk, and I might have had black velvet, but not blue. No one below a Knight of the Garter or the highest orders may wear blue velvet. I do not know even whether I may wear the chatelaine. I doubt if father had 200 merks of land, and of course I cannot wear cloth of silver or gold. No one less than barons can wear that. And as for miniver, I do not even know if barons may wear it. I believe I should have to be a countess, and I know for certain that diamonds and pearls are reserved for dukes and duchesses. So I shall have to take everything off, and just wear my old things and the silk chemise." And she gave a little sigh. "It's all right, dear, we thought of that. Ian says that you are his ward now, and that therefore they could not object to you wearing anything that I may wear, and I may wear anything I like, except purple, which is reserved for the blood royal." To reach such a height of unimagined grandeur almost took Aline's breath away. "By my troth, this is a wonderful birthday," she said, and little Joan looked on in sympathetic wonder, secretly pleased at being associated with anyone so exalted. But her cup was filled to overflowing when she found that Ian had provided her with a costume of silk and fine red camlet trimmed with black velvet, besides a small gold chain, which things he said she was entitled to wear as a lady in waiting in his household. Shiona was giving a few last attentions to Aline's hair and adding the finishing touch, a blue velvet fillet decorated with 5 large crystals and 3 pearls. "What wonderful hair you have, dear," she said. Aline had always refrained from any allusion to her hair, and even turned the subject aside, but it had grown so phenomenally that she was feeling happier about it, and she cried gaily, "Oh, that's nothing," and darted away to Ian's room, where she happened to find him. Aline's beauty was proverbial, but she looked more dazzling than ever. Ian caught her in his arms and kissed her. "You are the loveliest thing on earth," he said. "Nonsense," answered Aline, "but I want to show Shiona the hair that was cut off." Ian took it from its hiding place, handling it lovingly, and gave it to her. "Come back," he said, "I have something else for you." She took the hair and with innocent joy showed it to Shiona, who was lost in astonishment. She then returned with it to Ian. He carefully put it away, and then said, "Shiona has dressed you, but I want to do the very last bit myself." He then opened his hand, and in it lay a light chain with a subtly designed pendant of which the dominant feature was a brilliant mass of red, one gigantic ruby which Ian had taken from the pommel of his sword. He clasped it round her neck, and it just fell on the white silk. "One touch of red in the blue and white," he said. "But after all, it's not as fine a red as your lips, heartsease." And he kissed them. The stone was obviously of immense value, and Aline tiptoed hesitatingly backward till she came to the wall. There on tiptoe she stood, with the palms of her hands flat against the wall and her chin slightly lifted till the back of her head also touched. She was a little dazed. At first the beautiful things had been a sheer joy. Even the momentary cloud of the sumptuary laws had been swiftly dispelled, but now the thought suddenly overcame her. How could Ian afford it? She noticed the plain simplicity of his own attire, and her quick intuition told her the truth. "Ian, Ian," she cried, "you should not give me all these things. What have you done? How did you do it? You have parted with something you should not." She did not move, and looked very tall in the becoming costume, standing with her heels raised high from the ground. Suddenly Ian realized that she would soon be a child no longer, and then he would lose her. It came like a knife. He had not admitted even to himself how much she was to him, but his love for her had gradually absorbed his whole being. It was the greatest shock he had ever experienced in his life. He stepped forward and picked her up in his strong arms and kissed her passionately. "It was my sword, heart of mine," he said, "but there is nothing in the world I would not wish you to have." Aline endeavoured to protest, but he laughingly put his hand over her mouth and led her downstairs. There was a large concourse of guests, and the dinner was quite a sumptuous ceremony, with a great boar's head brought in with much solemnity. Ian and his mother sat in the middle of the high table, and Aline had the seat of honour on his right. When dinner was over they strolled in the pleasaunce, and afterwards came in and played games such as hot cockles and hunt the slipper, in which everyone, both old and young, took part. Then followed the dancing. If the guests had been charmed before by Aline's beauty, now they were enthralled. Aline and the Duke led off with a stately pavane, and all watched with rapt interest the slow, dreamy movements that displayed to perfection the exquisite loveliness of the child's form. Ian had learned dancing in Italy and France, and was a consummate exponent of the art, so that the two made a picture the like of which had never been seen in broad Scotland. After the pavane they danced the cinque paces, a new dance not long introduced from Italy, which in turn was succeeded by the lovely coranto that gave a new opportunity for Aline to reveal her light and agile grace, vying in its airy swiftness with the beauty of the more studied movements of the slower dance. Ian's costume was of a blue somewhat deeper in tone than Aline's, with white hose and other touches of white as in hers, and the result made a pleasing colour effect as they whirled together in the dance. But it was not only by her appearance, but by her subtle charm of manner, that the child fascinated every one present. They had heard the main facts of her sad story, and each and all did their utmost to give her pleasure. At the close of the evening they held a mock coronation ceremony, in which Aline was crowned with a plain gold circlet, and then, while seated on the throne, every guest was presented to the queen of the evening, and they all kneeled and kissed her hands, barons, earls, countesses, and everyone present. Aline could not help a smile when the Earl of Hawick, who was present, kneeled before her. This was the man that only a few months ago she had been nervous to see, and now he was humbly kneeling and kissing her hand. It had been a supremely happy day for Aline, and her only regret was that Audry had not been able to share it. Even this was modified by a curious coincidence after the guests had gone. They had all left early, as most of them had ridden from long distances, and even those who were putting up in Stirling had some way to go. After the last guest had departed, and while the family were seated round the hearth, the castle bell rang, and they heard the drawbridge being lowered. Their own serving man appeared shortly afterward. "My lord, a man named Walter Margrove, who hath a boy with him, hath arrived, and saith that he wisheth to see you on a matter of private concern." "Shew him up," said Ian. Walter Margrove came in somewhat hesitatingly, accompanied by a still more nervous lad. Aline, in her white and blue costume, rushed forward to greet them, whereat Walter was quite taken aback, and Wilfred, for it was he, nearly turned tail and fled. Ian advanced and shook their hands and presented them to the Duchess and the Lady Shiona. "If you had arrived a few minutes ago," he said, "you should have been presented to the Queen's Grace. Get on your throne again, your Highness," he said to Aline, and then with much laughter they made Walter and Wilfred kneel and kiss her hand. Walter had recently been in Holwick, and had decided that he might vary his programme by a tour in Scotland, and make it an opportunity of seeing Ian and Aline and little Joan, and of taking them the news from Upper Teesdale, together with a letter from Audry. The venture had proved a great success, and Walter was in an unusually contented frame of mind, even for him. "Sit down, man," said Ian, "and tell us everything about Holwick. We should much like to know all that befell after we escaped." "Oh, but tarry a little, Ian," said Aline. "There is something that must be done first. You tell Walter what we have been doing while I talk a while with Wilfred. Wilfred, come hither," she continued, leading the way to one of the double-seated windows. "I'm so glad to see you again, Wilfred," she said when they had sat down, "and you are looking well." "Yes, Mistress Aline, and I am glad to see you, and oh, mistress, you are looking bonny in those brave things," he added in a burst of boyish admiration, and then subsided, overcome by shyness for having said too much. "Wilfred," she said, "you recall the last time that we met and what we spake about?" "I do indeed, and I shall not forget your sympathy." "Do you remember my saying that I thought the spirit of light must in its own time triumph over the spirit of darkness? I did not know at the time what moved me to say it. I only meant it in a general way, and yet I had a strange presentiment that it had some special meaning for you." "What do you mean?" he asked. "Wilfred, what was the sad news that you heard at Kirkoswald? Tell me." "They told us that little Joan had gone to Durham and died there." "Yes, but did you hear it from anyone who really knew Joan?" "No, mistress. It was from a man who had been over to Holwick." "Then how do you know it was true?" "Oh, Mistress Aline, said the boy, "do you think it might be untrue?" "I know it was untrue," she said gently. For the moment the boy was too overcome to speak. His heart beat violently, his eyes grew round and large. "Oh, tell me, he besought. "I promised that I would bring you back the things you gave to Joan. I cannot do that yet, so I am going to bring you Joan herself. She is here in this place." "Here in this place?" he repeated, as Aline rose and went to fetch the little girl. She was back in a minute or two, and the boy was still seated in the same attitude, dumbfounded. "Here she is, Wilfred," she said, leading Joan forward by the hand. The boy looked from one to the other, too bewildered to know what to do. Oh, how lovely Joan looked in her red costume guarded with black velvet, and the white linen chemise showing below her throat and beneath the velvet hem. But he was too bashful to advance. Joan, however, was equal to the occasion. "Well, Wilfred, are you not going to speak to me?" And she stepped forward and threw her arms round his neck. Aline withdrew and left the two children in the window seat, whence they emerged a few minutes afterwards, and timidly drew near the group round the fire. "Now tell us all about Holwick, Walter," said Aline, making a place for the two children.
"Yes," said Ian. "Why were they so slow in pursuit?" "Mistress Mowbray would not let them have the horses from the hall, and the folk broke the girths and bridles of their own horses, and finally they had to get fresh horses in Middleton. The excitement was tremendous, but the strangest thing to the most part of us was the behaviour of Mistress Mowbray. She seemed to be greatly concerned, and wrung her hands and said, 'By the Lady, I trust the child hath escaped.' And later in the day Elspeth told me that she met Thomas in the lower quadrangle, and he, knowing the hatred that Mistress Mowbray had toward you, must needs cry unto her, 'Methinks those fresh horses from Middleton will soon bring the jade back.' And she grew purple in the face, and said to him that if they did, she would see whether it were too late to lodge him in jail because of the corn he had taken along with Andrew. I saw Thomas when I was there last. He is an ill creature, and he much misliked it when it was clear that Mistress Aline was safely away. Yet is he but a white-livered knave. Father Ambrose rouseth my ire more than he." "But you spake of Mistress Mowbray," said Ian. "Yes, the first thing that she did was to send over to Appleby that very night for Mistress Audrey, who came the next morning. Elspeth said that the proud woman wept on her neck so that it were pity to see. I would not have been in the place of Father Martin or Father Austin if they had fallen into her power. For days she made the household tremble under the weight of her authority. The next day Master Richard came back looking like a broken man. He said he had tried everything but could do nothing. As the time passed on, and it gradually became clear that the pursuit had failed, he recovered himself. Luckily for Mistress Audrey, no one thought of questioning her as she had been away so long, but everyone was marvelling who it could possibly have been that had dropped on a sudden from heaven. Then news began to leak through. First they heard that 2 of the pursuers had been buried at Haltwhistle. Then came the news of the night that you spent at Brampton. Wilfred Ackroyd was found, and stuck to his tale that you had gone to Carlisle, but they found nothing there."
"Oh, Wilfred," said Aline. "I cannot help it," he said. "I did laugh when I saw them galloping off the wrong way."
"Timothy held his peace," continued Walter, "and no one seemed to connect the drowned prisoner in the Eden with Mistress Aline. Indeed, I doubt if the tale of your drowning ever reached Holwick, your Grace. The priests went south, and Mr. Mowbray failed to track them, at any rate at first. I believe he did eventually get into communication, but they refused to say anything. It seemed pretty clear that Mistress Aline had escaped, but who was her saviour has remained to this day an insoluble mystery."
"Then they guessed nothing from your letter, Ian?" said Aline.
"No," said Walter. "When I was there your note that you sent in a roundabout way through Master Eustace Cleveland had just arrived. They were overjoyed to hear of the child's safety, and after much discussion came to the conclusion that Cleveland himself had something to do with it in spite of his denial. 'Mary,' said Mistress Mowbray, 'I saw the way he was taken with the child.' 'So was everyone except yourself, woman,' said Master Richard. 'That proves nothing.' Mistress Mowbray mumbled something about not taking up with every new face like some people, and Master Richard did not press the point."
"Who told you that?" asked Aline.
"Mistress Audrey, and she says that since the first few days, when her anger had passed, her mother has been much gentler than was her wont to everyone. She has had your little garden carefully wrought over. Mistress Aline might come back, she says. She is much changed. Master Richard believes that Mistress Aline is somewhere in hiding in Teesdale, but he has forbidden enquiry to be made, as he thinks, under the circumstances, it is safer, in the event of any attempt on the part of the authorities to find her, that they can all honestly say they know nothing. I believe that he personally thinks Master Gower knows more than Master Cleveland."
"Now let me read Audry's letter," said Aline.
This was a matter of some difficulty, as Audry was barely able to write, but the evident trouble that the letter had been made it a dearer token of affection. Aline made it out as follows:
"To my dearest and most beloved cousin Aline Gillespie, thou canst not think how fain I was to get thy dear letter. Walter will tell thee the most part of the news, but I must with mine own hand tell thee how overjoyed I was to know of a surety of thy safety. When mother sent for me and I came home, I was heartbroken. I used to sleep in thy bed and kiss the things that thou hadst worn and cry myself to sleep. But gradually it seemed clear that thou hadst escaped, and I offered up many prayers of thankfulness, as shall I again and again this night. I have one item of good news. Dost remember the linen that mother found in our room? It was then lying with the wrappings and cord with which it came. She took them all down, and must herself have put the wrappings on that little dark shelf near her linen chest. I recognized them one day by the colour of the cord, and I took them down, and lo, within, there was the little book. I have put it in its own secret place in the lock in the library. I am sure this will glad thine heart. Some day, I trust, thou wilt be able to read the rest to me. Thou wilt indeed be the grand lady now. To think of thee living in a great castle with a real duke. May God be with thee. From Audry Mowbray." After Aline had read the letter, they told Walter the true state of affairs, and how he had happened to come on the only festal day that they had had. It was arranged that Walter and Wilfred should put up for the night. There certainly was ample room for the horses in the empty stables. The Duchess was tired and went to bed early, and was soon followed by Shiona, so that Ian and Aline were left by themselves. They sat quietly for a long time, Ian gazing silently at Aline, idly sketching her shifting poses on the easel that happened to be standing near. But he was not conscious of what he was doing. His thoughts were far away as they wandered over the strange circumstances of his career. Aline was more like her mother than ever, although still more surpassingly beautiful. He was quite sure about it now. It was undoubtedly Aline's mother that he had loved with that wild boy love when he was but 13, and now Aline would soon be a woman herself. Who was there, he wondered, who would be worthy of such a treasure? In any case it could not be very long now before someone claimed her. His own mother was married at 15. So was the Lady Jane Grey, whom Aline in some ways resembled. He sighed sadly. "Are you not happy, Ian? I am so happy tonight," said Aline, and came across and kissed him, and then nestled at his feet after her favourite manner. "Not altogether," he said. "Tell me what it is." "Not tonight, heartsease," he answered, bending down and kissing the fragrant hair. "Some day, perhaps I will." For a time the room was very still. Suddenly a thought occurred to Ian. "I've just remembered something," he said. "I will get it." The rush of events had crowded the little pouch and its contents out of his mind, but his present mood reminded him of it. He brought the amulet from its hiding place. Aline was still seated on the floor. He sat down on the floor also, a little behind her, and lifted one of the lovely hands. "I have something else that I meant to give you before," he said, holding up the bracelet. The strange blue stones shone in the firelight as if they themselves were on fire. "Weal where I come as a gift of love," he read. "Pray God it may be so, heart of mine." Aline leaned back and lay with her head on his lap, looking up at him as he told the story. "There are no scars on the beautiful hands now," he said softly. She half drew the hand away and then stopped, and it lay passively in his hold as he lovingly fastened the bracelet round the perfect wrist. She did not thank him. She did not speak. She only lay there quietly, looking into his eyes. A log slipped from the fire. It did not make much noise, but the sound echoed through the deserted rooms. How absolutely alone together they were. Somehow the bracelet seemed to have a special significance. Perhaps she might be held after all. A feeling of peace, almost of happiness, stole over him. "You are good to me," she said at last. "Yes, I am happy." End of chapter 27.
Chapter 28 of The Child of the Moat. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Child of the Moat by Ian Bernard Stoughton Holborn. Chapter 28. The Last Adventure. In order that Aline should not discover her presence, little Joan had been put to sleep the first night in an upper chamber, in a wing of the great castle, remote from that occupied by the family. To avoid extra trouble on the day of the birthday, she returned there the second night, although in future she was to have a small anteroom connected with the girls' chamber. In the rooms below her were the servants who had been hired for the occasion. She half undressed, and as she sat combing her hair, she looked out at the dark night. Below, she heard the rushing of the burn, and dimly, under the starry sky, she could see the great hills to the north. There was a close feeling in the air, as though there might be thunder or heavy rain. It was a little oppressive, but her heart was so full of gladness that she refused to allow it to influence her. How strangely things had come about! She remembered the horrible prophecy, the mole at the graves, about her going away that seemed to mean death. It was curious how it had been fulfilled and yet not fulfilled. Could the old hag really in some way see into the future? And what did the prophecy mean about her beautiful little mistress? "She shall follow not long after. Mary, I see the fire about her." They had indeed come near to burning her, but she had escaped the flames. Well, all has turned out for the best so far. Mistress Aline said that the light would overcome the dark. I believe that she is stronger than old Mole after all, she thought. She had finished combing her hair, and after kneeling before her little crucifix, was soon in bed and asleep. Aline meanwhile, however, lay awake. The heavy storm, feeling in the air, would not allow her to rest. She was excited also from the events of the day. After an hour or two she got up and looked out. The stars had all gone out, and the thick clouds made the night impenetrably black. Shiona was sound asleep. She crept back again to bed and tossed, but it was of no avail. Another hour passed. She thought she would get up and feel for the tinder box and light the lamp. Where was it? Could she find it in the dark? As she lay there wondering, it seemed to get a little lighter. Yes, it was certainly getting lighter. Surely it could not be morning yet. She lay for a few minutes. Things in the room were rapidly becoming visible, but that was surely not daylight. No, it was not daylight. She jumped up and looked out. Gramercy, the castle is on fire! She looked again. It was the wing where Joan slept. She crossed the room and woke Shiona. "Quick!" she said. "The castle is on fire. Wake them all. Tell Ian. Joan will be burnt. I must go." She dashed down the stairs as she was, without staying to put anything on, and ran across the courtyard. There she met the terrified servants rushing from the building. "Where is Joan? Have you seen her?" she asked. "No, mistress," they said. "She must still be in her room." Aline ran to the foot of the stairs. "You must not go up," they screamed. "You must not go up. The stairs will fall." It was an unfortunate fact that at some time, when alterations were being made, a wooden stairway had been substituted for the original stone one, which now existed only in a ruinous condition. But Aline ran on without heeding the warnings and started to climb the stairs. The fire had broken out on the second floor and the flames were raging through to the staircase. Could she get past? She caught up her nightrobe in a tight bundle on her breast to try to keep it from the fire, and made a rush. The flames scorched her skin and she burned her bare feet on the blazing boards. But she managed to get past. One sleeve even caught alight, but she was able, after she had passed through, to crush it out with her other hand. "Joan, Joan!" she shouted, as she made her way into Joan's room. Joan was still asleep, partly stupefied by the smoke. Aline roused her and they rushed back to the stairs, but in the interval the whole stairway had become a bellowing furnace, and the flames roared up it, so that they could not look down. Joan gave a little pitiful cry. "We are lost, oh Mistress Aline, we are lost." "No, not yet, Joan. Keep up a stout heart. Let us try if there be not another way." They ran through 2 rooms in the opposite direction to the stair and came to a door. It was locked. They tried in vain to open it. They beat upon it, but it was beyond their strength to break, so they went back to Joan's room. "Can you climb, Joan?" asked Aline. "No." "Then I must try to let you down." She seized the bedclothes as she spoke and knotted them together. Alas, they could not possibly reach. She remembered how Ian had saved Wilfred by the rope under the bed and feverishly threw off the mattress. The bed had wooden laths. She looked out of the window and saw that a crowd had gathered below. How far down would the bedclothes extend? She made trial and shouted to the crowd that someone should try and find a tall ladder, while others, in case of failure, should bring a blanket and make a soft pile of hay. The crowd scattered, and in a few moments there was a great heap of hay and some 10 persons holding a blanket stretched above it. Yet look as they would, no ladder was to be found, except a little short thing that was no use. Possibly the other ladder was in the burning building. Possibly it had been mislaid in the festal preparations. Aline's lips were parched and her tongue clave to the roof of her mouth. For the moment she nearly succumbed to her fear. So it was Joan's life or hers. Why cannot Joan climb? She thought. Surely she could manage to get down as far as that. She looked at the child, but she was stiff with terror and absolutely helpless. Somehow Aline felt it was not the same thing as when she had swum the river. Then she had a chance of her life. Indeed, if she had had no chance, there was not the slightest use in trying to swim, as it could not have helped Ian. Here there was no chance. Could she think of no other way? The flames roared nearer. She began to find it hard to breathe. "Perhaps there is a way," she said, "but who can think in a case like this?" Joan had now become unconscious. Aline thought no more. The sacrifice was made. She tied one end round Joan and put a pillow on the sill to prevent chafing. She dragged the bed to the window and took a turn with the extemporized rope round one of the knobs to prevent it from going too fast. She lifted the child and gently lowered her toward the ground. For a moment she hesitated again. Could she climb down and untie Joan? No, the whole thing might break. The drop below Joan was about 15 feet. "Hold tight," she shouted, and those below braced themselves together and gripped the blanket firmly, and the child fell into it. She was so light that the hay below was not necessary. The fire had now reached half across the room itself, and was breaking through the floorboards in little tongues of flame, when the choking smoke curled upward. The end had come then. There was no hope. She turned to go and see if by any chance the locked door could be made to yield. It was vain, as indeed she knew, and the flame and smoke in that room was worse than her own. She ran back and looked out of the window. She thought she saw Ian with a white drawn face looking upward, but he disappeared. Once again, in the frenzy of despair, she rushed to the other room and flung herself against the door, but had to stagger back to Joan's room before she was completely overcome. The flames again caught her nightrobe, and she tore it from her as she struggled to the window where she might still breathe. The heat was awful. Oh, the pain of it! "But I must die bravely," she said, "as Father would have me do." All that she had ever done seemed to rise before her. She saw her mother as in the portrait. She saw her father and Audrey, and last she saw Ian. He seemed to be weeping over her. Was she already dead? No. And she prayed, "Lord Jesus, Thou hast taught me to come unto Thee, and I beg of Thee to forgive me all that I have done wrong in my life. Take me in Thy arms, and if it please Thee, end this terrible pain. Be with Ian, and comfort him, Lord, when I am gone. Watch over little Joan, and make her happier than I have been. Oh, Lord, the pain, the pain!" The smoke thickened. She gave one little gasp and spoke no more. Aline was right. It was Ian that she had seen below. Shiona had first roused her mother, and then Ian. He had gone to the stairway just in time to see it give way and come down with a crash. He had then endeavored to get around the other way, but the smoke and flame was impossible. Once more he had come down and obtained some wet cloths to wrap over his face and make one more attempt. It was on this occasion that he had glanced up and seen Aline at the window. She looked just as he had seen her in his visions, with the flame and smoke rushing round her. It was this then that he had foreseen. It was this that the old woman had foretold. A sword went through his heart, followed by a dull crashing pain that seemed to paralyze his will. He ran as in a dream. Again he reached the range of upper rooms. The flames belched forth at him, and the smoke took weird fantastic shapes. It stretched out long skinny arms as though to hold him back, and there all round him were evil mocking faces spitting out at him with tongues of flame. Voices surged through the air. "This is the end. You shall not reach her. She shall die, but you shall live. Live." The voices ended in a peal of laughter. What was life to him without Aline? He was going mad, he knew it. Mad, mad! That was the fiendish scheme of the powers of darkness. He would live and yet never see anything all his life but the dead child. Horrible! He had come to the worst part. He wrapped one of the wet cloths about his mouth and nose and over his hair, and plunged into the smoke and flame. It roared, it stung, it blinded him. He nearly screamed, but he staggered through and came to the great oak door. He tried, like Aline, to open it, but it would not yield. He hurled his weight against it. It was of no avail. Again and again he tried, and then stood back to look for some weapon. A heavy oak table all ablaze stood on one side of the room. He dashed at it and heaved it over, seizing one of the legs and wrenching at it with all his might. He strove and pulled and then kicked it with his foot. It came away with a loud crash. It was partly burned, and the red-hot surface bit into his flesh. He did not care, but raised it above his head and turned to the door. Tortured by the agony of heat as he was, there, to his excited imagination, appeared the horrible form of Mole of the Graves, leering at him and barring the way. She seemed to push him back with her bony claw-like hand. He swung the heavy oak leg through the air like a maniac and shrieked, "All the devils in hell shall not hold me back." He frothed at the mouth and battered in her skull. She grinned at him as the blood trickled through her teeth and pointed to the monstrous shapes that seemed to gather out of the smoke. He thrust her aside with his foot. His heart ceased to beat, but he thundered on the door. Once, twice, thrice, and the fourth time it gave way, while the door flew open and he fell heavily forward. He scrambled to his feet and hurried on. There by the window lay the beautiful little body. As his brain reeled, he saw the martyr, George Woodsheart, standing over it in the fire, holding the evil spirits at bay. Ian's eyes seemed to start from his head. He pressed his hands over them as he advanced and looked again. The flames were actually touching her. Oh, she was dead, but how unutterably beautiful! Why, for the second time in his life must death snatch out of it the one supreme treasure? Legions of thoughts swirled through his mind. He would paint her like that. Why was he not a sculptor? He would immortalize her form in marble, that transcendent loveliness. As he stooped quickly, suddenly his brain cleared, and gathering up her hair, he wrapped it in one of the wet cloths and drew it in a single thickness over her face. With another he covered what he could of the exquisite white form, and picked it up and ran. This time the fiends seemed unable to reach him, but before he arrived at the third room there was a reverberating roar. Part of the floor had given way, and a great blank 10 or 12 feet wide yawned before him. Once more the voices shouted, "You are ours, ours, and she is dead." Yet he heeded them not, but turned back a little way, then ran with all his might, and leaped and cleared the chasm. On he went down the stairs. The madness was on him again. Keep back, he shouted as he tore through the crowd. He looked so terrible, his face distorted with pain as he ran past, that they scattered in all directions. Shiona at first alone dared to follow him. He took Aline to one of the lower rooms in the other part of the castle. "Oil," he cried. "Send someone for oil and linen." Little Joan was coming timidly behind him and ran for the things. Ian bent over Aline. She did not breathe. He filled his lungs with fresh air, and putting his face down to hers, breathed into her and drew the air forth. It was the intuition of affection, and it saved her life. After a few moments she began to breathe again. Joan had then returned with the oil. It was the smoke and gases of the fire that had suffocated her, and except on the soles of the little feet there were nowhere any serious burns. But there were great red patches here and there all over her, and the arm where the nightdress had first caught fire was slightly blistered. He wrapped her entirely in oiled linen and laid her gently on a mattress that had been brought down. All the time he never spoke a word, and Shaona was frightened at his strange manner. Immediately as he had finished he fell senseless to the ground. They picked him up and laid him on the mattress. He was badly burned in several places, particularly the palms of his hands. He had also, as they afterwards discovered, strained himself severely in the leap with the child in his arms. For a time he lay still, and then began to rave in a wild delirium. They did what they could for him, while Walter took his best horse and galloped to Stirling for a physician. Meanwhile the neighbors from far and near were fighting the fire. There were 3 well shafts carried up to the roof in the walls of the castle. The chains of men and women passed the buckets from hand to hand. The same was done from the burn down below. They did not attempt to do more than keep the fire from spreading beyond the blazing wing. But a new ally came to their aid that helped them not a little. The long, threatening storm burst upon them with thunder and lightning, but accompanied by a torrential deluge of rain, and before morning the fire was completely under control. End of chapter 28. Recording by Lynette Geisel. Chapter 29 of The Child of the Moat. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Child of the Moat by Ian Bernard, Stoughton Holborn. Chapter 29. A Tale of a Tub. It was a beautiful late autumn day, and the sun was shining on the moat and the old walls of Holwick. Some few weeks previously, news had arrived in that remote corner of the death of Queen Mary and the accession of Elizabeth, and Audrey was sitting as she often did in the bay window of Mistress Mowbray's bower, looking down toward Middleton, when 4 riders and a pack horse were seen approaching the gates. Audrey had noticed their coming, and as they drew nearer she recognized 2 of them and ran eagerly out to meet them. "Oh, how I have hoped for you to come," she said, "and somehow I knew it would not be long before you were here." Ian dismounted and helped his sister and Eileen to alight, while the serving man took the horses. Eileen was in perfect health, but Ian was still worn and thin. She had not been long in recovering, but he had hovered between life and death for some time. "This is the Lady Shaona, Ian's sister," said Eileen. Audrey came forward a little shyly, but Shaona said, "Oh, I have heard so much about you," and kissed her warmly. Audrey then flung her arms around Eileen as though she would never let her go. "You must not leave Ian in the cold," said Eileen. "No, indeed, I should think not," exclaimed Audrey. "Why, if it were not for him, you would not be here at all," and she held up her face to be kissed. "She is getting too big to be kissed, is she not?" said Ian. "Not at all," said Eileen. "You kiss me." "That is a different matter," said Ian, laughing, as he kissed Audrey. "You are my ward, you see." Although Master Richard and his wife were by no means pleased at the political change, they were delighted that it had brought their young visitor, and Mistress Eleanor greeted her with an unusual show of affection. She had been long enough falling under Eileen's spell, but the conquest was complete, and resulted in the redevelopment of a side of her nature that had practically lain dormant since a charming girl of 16. Master Richard had met her in York, and against all the wishes of his parents had insisted on marrying her. She had become more human and more anxious to please, and gradually won the esteem and even love of her servitors and the people of Holwick. Aline introduced her escort, and while they were being shown to their rooms, she went and found Elspeth. Elspeth wept tears of joy over her and said, "Now, Henny, I shall be able to die happy. I thought the sunlight had gone out of my life forever." They had a long talk, and in the afternoon she went down with Elspeth to the Arnsides. Janet seized a stool and dusted it for the young mistress, and John, who was just outside the house, came in. "Oh, John," Aline said, "I can never repay you or thank you enough. It is no use my trying to put my thanks into words." "What I did was nothing," he said. "But if you had not done it, the Duke of Oaknell would never have come, and I should have been lost. No one who knew you, Mistress Aline, could have done less." The time seemed all too short to the Arnsides when Aline turned to go. "I shall ask Cousin Richard to let us stay here for at least a month," she said, "even if I do not come back here to live. I am going to teach you to read, John, and I have brought you this." And she produced a beautifully bound copy of the Scriptures, which she had bought for him with all the money she had left. John was confused with gratitude, and Aline fled, leaving him an opportunity to recover by himself. She had had a long talk with Ian, in which they had decided that it was right that Master Mowbray should hear the whole story and be told about the secret room, as after all it belonged to him. So that night she secured the little book and took it up to her old room with Audry. As they were undressing, Aline took off the ruby pendant, which she was wearing concealed beneath her simple costume. "Oh, how lovely!" exclaimed Audry. "Diamonds and pearls, and what a marvelous ruby! But Aline, you have no right to wear this." "I feel a little doubtful, but Ian says it is all right, as at present I am in the position of his ward, and in any case I am Scots and not English." "But if you are father's ward, then you will count as English." "Anyway, I shall not wear it in public, so it does not matter." "Your luck has come at last, Aline. Just fancy your wearing diamonds and pearls like a duke's daughter. But you deserve to be lucky after all you have been through. I would not go through what you have been through for all the luck in the world, you beautiful, lovely thing." Audry had by this time begun combing Aline's hair. "Why, Aline," she said, "your hair is not quite so long as it was." "Oh, I forgot to tell you," said Aline, and she told her all about the cutting off. "But it has very nearly grown again. It has been extraordinarily quick." "Yes, you are beautiful," Audry went on. "Look at that hair. Look at that neck. Look at those perfect ears." "Do not be silly, Audry." "Yes," said Audry, not heeding. "And the luck is not over yet. You will be married very soon." Aline blushed. "Be quiet, Audry." "But you are far too beautiful and charming and good to be left long unmarried," said Audry, embracing her impulsively. "Come, let us get into bed and sit and study the book." So Aline read to the end and discovered that it explained how to open the great iron chest. The next day they managed to leave Shaona and Mistress Mowbray, and Aline, Audry, and Ian took Master Mowbray into the library. They sat in the great window seat, and Aline read out of the little book and told the story of their adventures, which was frequently supplemented by Audry and Ian. Richard Mowbray was again entranced, and he thought Aline's new tale even more wonderful than Mallory. When she had finished, they all went down to the secret room, and Master Richard asked hundreds of questions about all their experiences. They examined everything and explored the secret passage to the cave and back. "But there is still one thing that we have to do," said Aline. and that is to open the great iron chest and see what is inside. I have only just discovered how it is done, and there is a good deal that requires doing first. But listen to this. Exactly under the middle of the great oriel window of the library, the book says, that 1.5 feet below the water in the moat is a chain made of links of green heart wood, so as to withstand the wet. And at the end of that is a large round ball, also of green heart, and embedded in it with pitch is the great key of the iron chest. I have been thinking how to get it, and if the chain has not rotted, and we do not have to dredge for the ball, I think I might go a-sailing for it in a tub, which would be fun. We might see to that this afternoon, and then open the chest tomorrow. You will probably upset, said Audry, but as you can swim like a fish, that will not matter. But I shall laugh to see you tumble in. You bad girl, said Aline, and chased her around the room. Well, I'm going to try anyway. After dinner, Master Richard went and ordered 2 of the men to bring a great tub from the laundry, while Aline went upstairs and changed her things, putting on a pair of boys' trunks. She then threw a cloak about her and came down. The tub was rolled round till it was opposite the window, and then Aline insisted that the serving men should go away. A board, hastily thinned down at one end, made a sort of rude paddle, and with shrieks of derision from Audry, the others held the tub, and Aline cautiously got in, and squatted tailor-wise on the bottom. They all laughed so much that they nearly upset the tub at the outset. Aline then started on her perilous voyage, but the tub being circular, every time she took a stroke with the paddle, it simply spun round and round. Those on the bank held their sides with laughter, but the more they laughed, the more confused Aline became. She tried taking a stroke first one way and then the other. This was not quite so bad, but the tub revolved backwards and forwards like a balance wheel. "Try little short strokes, pulling the paddle towards you," shouted Ian, when the laughter had a little subsided. This answered somewhat better, and the tub slowly made its way across, but with many vagaries and strange gyrations. At last she reached the wall right under the great projected corbel of the window, and very cautiously, putting down her arm, she felt the chain. "Hurrah!" she shouted, "I have it!" But she spoke too soon. As she pulled the chain, the tub overbalanced, and Aline tumbled head first into the moat. Audry collapsed altogether at this, and rolled over on to the grass. Ian, however, for the moment, took it seriously and was going to jump in, but Audry seized one of his ankles to stop him, and laughed still more till the tears ran down her cheeks. "You'll kill me, you two," she said, as Aline's head appeared above the water with long green weeds hanging in her hair. Aline swam to the chain and found that the ball was very heavy. She then righted the tub. Get in quickly," shouted Audry mischievously, and Aline, without thinking, made the attempt, with the result that the tub lifted and turned over on her like an extinguisher. Audry was convulsed. "You little mischief," said Ian, and picked her up and held her out over the water at arm's length, but she only laughed the more. Aline meanwhile again righted the tub, and then shouted to the others to bring an axe. Audry refused to go. She said she must wait for the end of the performance. So Master Richard ran and called one of the men, who brought the things required. While he was gone, Aline with difficulty got the ball into the tub. She then swam across for the axe, and taking it over, she cut the chain, threw the axe in with the ball, and, pushing the tub before her, swam back to the other side. "You will be getting to know this moat," said Audry, as Ian pulled Aline all dripping up the bank. "This is your 3rd adventure in the moat since you came." She then went up and changed her clothes and joined the others in the solar. There she found that Father Lawrence had just arrived. He was looking worn and worried, but the smile lit up his face as Aline came in. The old man's hand trembled as he laid it on her head. "You are growing tall, my child. We shall soon see you a woman. I have just arrived with some strange and horrible news, which I have been telling my Lord of Oakhill. You remember old Mole of the Graves, Aline?" "Yes, father." "She's dead, my child. I saw her a few minutes ago on my way up. She was lying at the foot of the crags." Aline shuddered. "We cannot leave the poor creature there," he continued. "Can you let me have a couple of men, Master Richard? And would you mind her lying here for the night? I will arrange for the funeral tomorrow." "Certainly," said Master Mowbray, and he arose and accompanied Father Lawrence. 20 minutes later Aline and Ian were crossing the courtyard and saw the bearers carrying the body on a hurdle into the room below the granary. Ian at once drew Aline away in another direction that she should not see the horrible sight. He had caught one glimpse of the face, and it was enough. It was the same as he had seen in his awful vision in the fire, the terrible grin, the blood trickling through the teeth. "Come away, little one. Let us go elsewhere," he said. After all was quiet again, Thomas Carluke walked stealthily across the quadrangle and entered the room where the body lay. A sheet had been placed over it, but he drew it aside. The grin on the face seemed to mock him. "Aha!" he said. "You fooled me twice, you old wench, but you will never do it again. You need not laugh at me like that. I have cleared my score with you now. Did you not tell me that you would get rid of the child? And they got her out of the moat. Did you not tell me she would be burnt? And now Queen Mary is dead, and there are no more burnings. You miserable worm, what was the good of your hate? You are no better than Andrew, no better than Father Ambrose. Pah! You defied me just now on the crags, did you? Well, here you are, and I would do it again. Oh, it was so easy, one little push. Ha! You still mock? No, you cannot hurt me. No, no," he repeated apprehensively. "You are dead. You cannot come back. I will not believe it. The devil has your soul, but I must go, must go." He drew the sheet over the body again and went out. "Fool," he said to himself. "What am I afraid of? Fool, I say." Meanwhile, Aline was walking with Audry through the garden. "I am glad the horrible old thing is gone," said Audry. "Are not you?" "It seems so dreadful to say so," Aline answered, "but I cannot pretend that I am sorry. She always seemed to me a sort of evil influence, a spirit of discord and hate." "Yes," said Audry, slipping her arm round Aline's waist, "just as you are the spirit of love." "Don't be foolish, Audry. Besides, I do not believe that anyone could love everybody." "No, but need you hate them? Come now, did you hate old Moll?" "I do not know. Somehow she seemed too mean, too petty and spiteful to hate. You could not fight her exactly. She was not worth fighting, so to speak." "But I always felt," said Audry, "that behind the old woman, not in the old woman herself, was a power of evil and hate, a great power that could be fought." "Oh yes, quite so. I think there are things to hate. I do not believe in sickly sentiment, but that poor wretched old woman in herself was rather a thing to be pitied than hated. And now that I come to think of it, I never did meet anyone really to hate." "What about Thomas?" "That is just a case in point," said Aline. "I despise him, pity him. But one would lose one's own dignity in hating such a poor thing. Now if one could find someone really strong, really great and wicked, one could hate them. but no one of that sort has ever come my way. Have you thought of Father Martin? I do not hate him. I was afraid of him, and I did not think him altogether a good man, but in the main he seemed to act up to his lights. Father Austin I might have hated perhaps, but I do not know enough about him. There is someone over there that I love," she said suddenly, as Father Lawrence appeared at the other end of the garden. "I think he is the best man I have ever seen." "Better than Ian?" asked Audry. "I do not know, and it is impossible for me to say. Dear Ian, I used to feel that there was something weak about him, but I think I was wrong. The wonderful thing about him is that he is developed on every side. It is true that we have mainly seen the softer side, and also for a great part of the time he has been ill. But I keep discovering new things in his character. In any case, he has a far more difficult position than Father Lawrence. I should think that really it would be a much easier thing to retire from the world like a priest than to try and make one's self a more complete and fully developed being and remain in the world. And after all, the world would cease to exist if we were all priests and nuns. To live the worldly life is certainly the lowest, and to come out of the world is higher than that. Yet I am not sure that there is not something harder and higher still, and I believe Ian has done it. But here comes Father Lawrence." The children ran to him, and the three walked round the garden together. It was a rare picture, the fine tall figure, slightly bent, and the wonderful spiritual face, an epitome of the glory of age, and the two exquisite children just approaching the threshold on the other side of which they would soon reach the mysteries of adult life. After they had talked for some time, Audry asked, "How do you suppose, Father, that Mole met her death?" "I cannot say, my children. She may have fallen over by accident, but Master Richard thinks that she threw herself over. You know, little girl, how she hated you," he said, turning to Aline, "and she must have been bitterly chagrined that everything had gone so well for you. Perhaps he is right. But let us speak of other things." He stopped, and for a time no one said anything at all. Then, moved by some motive that he could not explain, he went on, "Children, I shall soon have to bid you farewell." "Oh, why?" they both said in a breath. "I do not know what prompts me to tell you, Mistress Aline," he said. Aline started. It was the first time he had ever addressed her like that, and the old man continued, "I have not yet said anything to anyone else, even of the old faith, and I know, child," he went on, dropping into the more familiar manner, "that you are not of us, so why should I tell you, a mere child, and a heretic?" He lingered on the word regretfully. "I am unable to say. The Queen's Grace is minded that there shall be an Act of Uniformity of this realm, and that the Prayer Book of 1552 shall be reaffirmed. It liketh me not, and I shall not subscribe, and therefore shall lose my benefice. I had hoped to end my days in Middleton, but it cannot be, and I must, if he be willing, take up my abode with my nephew. It will be a sore grief to me after all these years. But my work is done, and I must not repine. One thing, Aline, child, I would say, and that is this. Thou mindest how I have ever told thee that the light must overcome the dark, and so has it been with the machinations of that poor evil woman. So hath it been with you. Not that it will be ever so with things temporal, but it will be so in the world of the unseen and eternal. But farewell, my child, and I must go. Benedicata vos omnipotenza Deus, in nomina Potrissa et Filii et Spiritusa Sancti. Amen. May Almighty God bless you. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. When he had gone, Audry said, "How unjust is it that Father Ambrose will remain and that Father Lawrence should go?" "How so?" said Aline. "Have you not heard? Father Ambrose hath said that he will subscribe to anything that will keep his place, and he is the very man who persecuted you in the name of the church." "What a scoundrel!" said Aline. "I had liever see Father Lawrence the Catholic than Father Ambrose the Protestant hold his own, Protestant though I be. I must see if the Duke may not be able to do something, though he be not of this realm. Now that Queen Elizabeth's grace hath come to the throne, he hath many friends who are right powerful in this land. Father Lawrence is an old man, and will not be long in this life in any wise. Methinks it will not be a hard matter." "I hope you will succeed," said Audry, "and I shall do my best with Master Richard that Father Ambrose be moved, whatever dishonest shifts he may practice." They had reached the door that led into the garden. "Come, Audry, the afternoon is spent and it is time for supper." End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of The Child of the Moat. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Child of the Moat by Ian Bernard Stoughton Holborn. Chapter 30. The Great Iron Chest. The next morning Master Mowbray went over to Newbiggin to look at the cottage that had been occupied by Mole of the Graves, as it was his property, on the old Middleton estate, which was much larger and more important than Holwick. The cottage was in poor condition, and he decided that it should be rebuilt. It was dinner time before he came back, so they were not able to go down to the secret room till the afternoon. "Now," said Aline as they entered, "first the chest has to be laid on its back." This they tried to do, but it was too heavy. They pushed and pulled, but they could not stir it. "Let us use some of those stout poles there, standing in the corner," said Ian. "Then we can lever it over." This they did, and with some difficulty the chest was turned over. "I expect this is the very thing for which the poles were used," Audry suggested. "Probably," said Aline, as she put her finger on the top right-hand rivet head and slid it an inch to the left. "Oh, that is how it works," exclaimed Master Richard, greatly interested. "Now you have to turn it back again." "Oh dear!" they all cried, but set to work, and again the chest stood upright. Aline then moved the second rivet in the same way. "Now turn it over again," she said. "This is too much. We are not galley slaves," expostulated Ian. "You are a tyrant, your highness." "Well, any way I help, my lord," answered Aline with mock gravity. "Help, you wee kitten," said Master Richard. "I think I do most of this, and it is my belief," he added, "that it is not to my interest that the chest should be opened at all." "Why not?" they all exclaimed. "Never mind. Come, I want to see what's inside of Faith." Once again they heaved and tugged and turned it over. Aline then moved the rivet. "Now turn it back again." "Look here, we cannot go on that way," said Master Richard. "There must be 30 rivets. We shall rebel, my liege." "No, you must do your duty." So once more they struggled and turned it back. "There, you have done your part," said Aline, and they all stood round and laughed at each other, when they saw how hot they looked. Everyone watched Aline with great curiosity as she now slid aside the whole of one of the iron plates of the chest and disclosed a small lock. Into this she fitted a key and turned it with some difficulty. It was the key on the bunch in the library, whose use Master Richard had not known. This enabled all the central part of the front to hinge down and disclose the large lock to which belonged the key from the moat. The lid was very heavy, and it took two of them to open it. The contents were covered by a black velvet cloth, and above it lay a parchment, upon which was inscribed in large letters, "Eileen Giuseppe, in accordance with my will, which lieth behind the lock opposite that which concealeth the book. James Mowbray." Eileen gazed in blank astonishment when she saw her own name. "That is your great-grandmother's name," said Master Richard, "but it is all right. The chest is yours all the same, as you are the sole heiress of that line. But if you do not mind, I should like to see the will, even before you lift the velvet cloth." Eileen ran upstairs, her heart beating with wild excitement, and was followed by Audry. The lock moved exactly as the other one had done, and there lay the lost will. "How stupid of us not to find it before," said Audry. "But, oh, I am so glad that something really good has come to you at last." They ran down again. "Here it is," said Audry, who was holding the will. "Let his Grace read it," said Master Richard, "as he is a disinterested party." It was a long will, but the tenor of it was that the old Mowbray estates at Middleton went to James Mowbray's son, but the little Holwick property, with half the contents of the library, was left to his daughter Eileen and to her heirs after her forever. The will concluded, "And that the said Eileen Giuseppe and my son-in-law, Angus Giuseppe, may be able to keep up the Holwick estate in a manner that is befitting, I also bequeath, for the use of the said Eileen and Angus, and their heirs after them, the great iron chest and its contents. The which chest, with the name of Eileen Giuseppe inside, is now within the secret room, and the means for the discovery of all these things are in the little book in the library, concealed in the lock opposite to this. The parchment with holes, which is hidden in the cover of the aforesaid book, is to be placed over each page in turn, and the letters that appear through the holes may then be read as words." "Well, little one, I always suspected that the Holwick property might be yours, but James Mowbray died suddenly, and the will was never found," said Master Richard. He saw clouds of anxiety gathering on the child's face, so he went on, "You must not think about it now. Let us look at the chest." Eileen lifted the velvet, and on top was a tray. It was filled with orphreys and other embroideries of the celebrated opus angelicum, and was of immense value. So perfectly had the chest fitted that the colors were all as marvelous as the day they were done. Below this was another tray, which contained exquisitely carved ivories and wonderful enamel work. Several beautifully bound illuminated manuscripts of the highest possible excellence, many of the covers being elaborately garnished with precious stones, and two jeweled swords, one of Spanish make and one from Ferrara, that almost equaled Ian's own. Beneath this tray again was a layer of soft leather bags in 10 rows of 5 each, every one of which contained 500 gold pieces. This brought them about 1/3 of the way down the chest. The remainder was in 3 portions. In the middle was a large oak box, which fitted exactly from front to back, and left about 1/5 of the chest on each side. These fifths were filled with solid gold and silver bars, packed like bricks to fill every crevice. Their total value was 4 or 5 times that of the gold pieces in the bags. Richard Mowbray and Ian lifted out the oak box, and it was found to contain a collection composed of the choicest examples of art and metalwork that any of them had ever seen in their lives. There were large mazers and other cups, a wonderful nef, and skillfully wrought platters. There were daggers and hunting horns and belts. There were chatelaines and embracelets and diadems. There, in a smaller receptacle, were lesser things, such as rings, pendants, necklaces, chains, clasps, and buckles. But finely jeweled as many of them were, it was the supreme art of the designs and the craftsmanship of their execution that was their main attraction. Little Aline was too overcome to speak. At last she recovered herself sufficiently to say, "And are all these things mine?" "Of course they are," said Master Richard, "and I do not know any one more worthy of them." She was silent for some time and then said, "Well, we cannot leave them all lying round. I must put everything back." The others helped, and although every one kept commenting on the lovely things and the strange experience, Aline never said a word all the time. It was clear that she was thinking hard, and that the putting back of the things was only to give her an opportunity to settle her thoughts. When they had finished, they all stood up. "Now we can save Auchil estates," said Aline triumphantly. "Ian, I give you half the gold and silver and one of the swords, and you are to have the other half, Audry darling. And Cousin Richard is to have Holwick Hall as long as he lives, and the other sword. Then everybody is to have some nice presents from the trays in the box. Audry and Cousin Richard and Joan and Mistress Mowbray and all the others, and Ian is to have the rest." "Impossible," said Ian. "Nonsense," said Master Richard. "Absurd," said Audry. "I absolutely mean what I said," said Aline. "But you have left nothing for yourself," objected Audry. "Yes, I shall have Holwick when I am old and no longer able to do anything, and if you are not married we can live together." "My little maiden must not be foolish," said Ian. "I think you are quite right to let Audry have half, unless you let Cousin Richard have the use of it first, for it would go to Audry, and I am sure you are right about Holwick. But my estates have nothing to do with you, sweet child. Besides, how are you going to live until you are too old to do anything? You cannot go a-begging, Princess, and someone would have to take care of you." "Oh dear, I had not thought about that. Yes, I suppose I should need someone to look after me." "I will look after you, little heart, if Cousin Richard will let me," said Ian softly. Richard Mowbray lay his hand on the young man's shoulder. "I agree," he said. Aline put up her hands and drew down Ian's face till their lips met. A look of happy content shone in her eyes. "Then I shall be well protected," she said. My dear children, the time has now come to say goodbye, both to you and Aline. But it might interest you to know that I read the story to a little girl before it was quite finished, and asked her if there was anything she would like to suggest. "Yes," she said, "a birthday party." Now a 16th century birthday party was rather a difficulty, as I never saw one described, but then there were so many difficulties of that sort. People in those days, for instance, thought that shaking hands was a much warmer sign of affection than kissing. You probably know that in France men still kiss each other at the railway station. But that would not do for my story, so, as in the case of language, I have modernized to suit my purpose. When, therefore, your learned uncle tells you that the story is all wrong, and that they did not fence with helmets, and that the curtsy was not invented, till much later, and that the library is far too big, and so on, you just tell him to write a 16th century story, and then you send it to me, and we will see how he gets along. If any of you would like to write to me and tell me what you would like altered, or what else you would like put in, I should be delighted. The story is only written to please you, and I wish I could see you and tell it to you myself. Also, you might let me know what you think ought to happen to Aline, and then, if you like the story, I will write you a sequel. But you must tell me how old you are. That is a very important point. With best wishes from Avis and myself. Now, do not tell me you do not know who Avis is. Look at the dedication and the first chapter and guess. Yours affectionately, Ian B. Stoughton Holborn, 1735 Grand Central Terminal, New York City, or in Britain, Merton College, Oxford. End of chapter 30. Read by Lynette Geisel. End of The Child of the Moat by Ian Bernard Stoughton Holborn.